The late 90s are considered a dark age for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The cartoon was over and its successor, Ninja Turtles: The Next Mutation, failed to stay on the air. Turtlemania was long gone, and the Image Comics run was cancelled and left incomplete. But that dry spell ended in June of 1999, when Peter Laird was doing a signing with Jim Lawson and Dan Berger. While there, he met three young women who happened to be TMNT fans. They told him about the ways the Turtles made a significant impact on their lives. This event inspired Peter to create a new TMNT series with Jim Lawson, Eric Talbot, and Michael Dooney. A year later, Peter became the sole owner of the franchise after buying Kevin Eastman's share of the rights. After this, he started working with Mirage Studios CEO Gary Richardson to explore ways to bring the Turtles back to TV and the toy shelves. This resulted in a new TV show from 4Kids, in collaboration with Lloyd Goldfine, and a two-part movie for the Hallmark Channel that died in development hell. TMNT returned with Volume 4, a run of issues that designed to make the Image Comics run non-canon, despite jumping from 2 to 4. The reason to ignore Volume 3 was that it was really hard for Peter to continue from a point he wouldn't have taken the Turtles to. He preferred to let that story stay in its own universe as Gary Carlson's vision. But now that Peter Laird was in charge, he started correcting some things that bothered him about the franchise, like Michelangelo's name. Initially, Kevin and Peter made a typo, and the character's name was Michelangelo, with an extra A in the middle, in comics, shows, and movies. But from then on, the character would be named Michelangelo. Volume 4 had a very successful first issue in December of 2001, which eventually returned for a second printing. On the artistic side, Laird used duo shades for the first 8 issues, but later started doing them directly on Photoshop over the ink pages. He would also do the lettering with Quirk Express on his Mac. He was fortunate enough to work with Jim Lawson, who would always leave enough space for word balloons despite not working with a full script. Inks were done initially by Peter Laird, later by Eric Talbot, and in the most recent issue, completed by Steve Levine. All covers were painted by Michael Dooney based on art by Jim Lawson. It's worth mentioning this now. This volume is still ongoing, and may never be finished, so most of the plots I will be discussing are incomplete. Before exploring Volume 4, there's one main plot to discuss: why the Jones family was split between Northampton and New York. When she was a bit younger, Shadow, Casey's adoptive daughter, got in trouble with a pack of werewolves. They threatened to get revenge on her on one fateful full moon night. Knowing she wouldn't be safe in the city, she moved with Splinter to Northampton, not to the now iconic farmhouse, but to Stainless Steel Steve's house, a retired superhero from the Justice Force who also lived with a superhero android known as Metalhead. She lived there for 5 years, even after making peace with the werewolves. This is a story I will cover in a different video. It is also essential to note the timing of Volume 4. The book came out just a few months after the events of September 2001. There's not enough space in this video to talk about the repercussions this traumatic event had on popular culture, but let's just say that mainstream comic books became more escapist than ever. But other comics became very political, and some even dared to question some of the decisions of the United States government, especially once the country went to war with Iraq. Volume 4 is a sci-fi story, and in that category, it's more in line with the optimistic science fiction stories of the 40s and 50s, where humans finally found enlightenment through technology after making contact with extraterrestrials. But as the Bush presidency continued, it also started going to very dark places about losing constitutional rights, radicalization, xenophobia, and the perils of going to war blinded by traumatic emotions. The first few issues were centered around an event that would change the world forever. And it all started on the dark side of the moon, as the Utroms and the Fugitoid were getting a base ready to travel to Earth. It was winter in the city, and in a scene that was a callback to the very first Ninja Turtles comic, the Turtles were fighting against the Manhattan Militia, a street army of the East Side that confused them for aliens and were out to kill them. Many years have passed since the events of TMNT Volume 2. The Turtles were now in their 30s and felt much older and slower. And of course, the cold of winter didn't help. It's worth mentioning that April and Casey were also in their 30s. I'll let you do all the mathematical gymnastics about that. The Turtles weren't trying to fight the Manhattan militia. They just ran into them, who also happened to have snowmobiles on rooftops. This resulted in an entertaining chase that, unfortunately, ended with Michelangelo being hit by a bus. Being in very bad condition, he was picked up by a stranger named Magnarok. In one of the snowmobiles, Donatello got into a subway tunnel where he completely lost control of the vehicle and had to jump before its explosion. A hidden room was exposed in the blast, revealing an abandoned armored truck. As for the Turtles' allies, April and Casey, now married, had been trying to have a baby for the past 5 years without success. Shadow, on the other hand, had a boyfriend named Jay in Northampton, and she would frequently train with Metalhead. Back to Michelangelo, he woke up strapped to a stretcher in an ambulance, but when he tried to escape from it, he realized this was a flying ambulance. He got rescued by a strange winged being named Raptor. Mikey later woke up in a secret hospital for superpowered beings named Kurtzberg Memorial, obviously named after the comic book legend Jack Kirby. During his initial panic, he discovered that the place was run by a retired hero, Zippy Lad. I'll talk about the Justice Force in a different video. Kurtzberg Memorial was only one of 3 of its kind worldwide. It was solely devoted to giving healthcare to super beings, mutants, and other exceptional cases. Back to the sewers, Donnie brought Raph and Casey to the armored truck, where they found 3 dead bodies inside. The truck was clearly stolen, but how it ended up there and why it was hidden was never explored. In a completely separate storyline that will only come back later in this video, in Guayana Highlands in southern Venezuela, some human scientists were exploring a tepui, trying to gridwalk a couple of 100 square miles of terra incognita. They were looking for a cryptozoological specimen, some kind of dinosaur-like creature spotted by the locals. But then they ran into a creature who shot them with something. Make a mental note of this, as we'll explore it later. On the dark side of the moon, the Utroms finally separated their base from the surface and started their trip to Earth. But of course, an object coming from the moon was hard to hide. The US Air Defense started tracking its presence, despite them jamming their frequency. People at the Air Defense headquarters could tell that the object came from the dark side of the moon. Not knowing what its intentions were, they went to DEFCON 3. Missiles, ships, and airplanes got ready for war. The National Guard was called to several cities, including New York City, which was on a very special edge given recent events. Casey, Don, and Raph managed to make the truck work again, but by the time they reached the surface, they found themselves in a brave new world, one where people were running in total panic at the sight of flying tugs. The Air Force attacked the flying base, but it had a perimeter shield that prevented any damage. The base landed on the sea and set itself over the sea level. The media was on alert, reporting the news of this alien presence. A tug came out from the base at some point, dragging the space shuttle Defiant, a ship that had been lost in space for weeks and presumed gone. They left the shuttle in front of the UN building, where the crew came out alive and then proceeded to introduce their new friends, the Utroms. After a minor funny incident, the Utroms were welcomed to Earth. Curious about the return of the Utroms, Mikey and Raph decided to check out the base. But on their way out of the sewers, they crossed paths with the Fugitoid. For more information about this character, check out this other video. Fugitoid and the Turtles watched the televised message of Korriban, the ambassador to Earth from the Utrom Confederation, live from the UN. He announced they were not here to invade, but to offer Earth entry into a greater world. Using the transmat, they could open the planet to other societies, cultures, science, and art. They hope to establish a nexus of interstellar trade and cultural exchange in their base in the Atlantic Ocean. Korriban announced they would only stay for 1 year. If after that period Earth decided that the Utroms were no longer welcome, then they would leave and try again in 100 years. But this wasn't taken at face value by many. Despite Splinter vouching for the Utroms, Shadow found herself wondering what their real intentions were. Their presence also put the Manhattan militia in a xenophobic mood. One of the many initial promises of the Utroms was to help scientists find a cure for cancer, a disease that was very similar to some other diseases they'd fought before. But despite this promise, hate groups started organizing against not only the Utroms, but also all kinds of alien visitors on Earth. Because of this hateful response, the whole world had to adapt to the new normal, especially religions and governments. To ensure aliens were free to walk in any country, the Xenoform Protection Act was created. But the Utroms had much to lose because of these loud hate organizations. One particular Utrom named Clag kidnapped the leader of one of these groups and later impersonated him. During that act, he tried to show others that changing one's mind over these polarizing subjects was possible. This was an early sign that the Utrom's actions weren't always aligned with their messages. During the following months, the Turtles stayed close to the Utroms and even had space adventures with them. They even gave Mikey a temporary pet bunny to help him overcome his sadness after losing Clunk. But that's a story for another video. Another of the Utrom's missions on Earth was to study sea currents, to better understand climate change and how it could affect the planet's future. During this period, the Turtles also became aware of another race very similar to the Triceratons, the Styracosaurs. Both races had a common ancestor and hated each other on a cellular level. After 6 months, the Utrom base opened to the public and became a nexus of interstellar transportation. April, Casey, and Shadow went to visit the Turtles, who had been working with the Utroms for a while. The change in laws and expectations changed the Turtles' lives completely. They could now roam free throughout New York without needing to hide. But at the base, there were some restrictions. No one was allowed to enter the place with weapons. And as you can imagine, with the Turtles all looking the same, they needed to differentiate each other somehow. So they were given temporary tattoos. These are the symbols for Leonardo, Raphael, Donatello, and Michelangelo. Donatello considered having different colored bandanas, but they found the concept a bit dorky. As to what these symbols meant, Peter had something in mind when he designed them, but he quickly forgot what they were. Because of these restrictions on weapons, the Foot Clan won the security contract at the base, as ninjas were good at empty-hand fighting. Everything was fine until April passed through a weapon detector and made the alarm go off. The Utrom guards quickly recognized April and had nanobots inside her body. They were, in fact, thousands of Utrom nanobots, a prototype that was stolen from them during their previous stay on Earth by one scientist they hired, Baxter Stockman, who later injected them in April. I went over the details of this event in this other video. Around this time, we got formally introduced to Glurin, a Utrom working on his theories for modifications on the translocation matrix, with the idea of moving objects through space, dimensions, and time. In this way, he spied out an alternate universe where the Turtles were superheroes. Back to the April situation, the Turtles and Casey theorized that the nanobots may have been the reason for April's infertility problems. However, there was no evidence for that. Unfortunately, the nanobots started assaulting April's brain and her nervous system, aware they were being watched. This caused April to fall into a coma. The Utroms called for Robin, her older sister, to be at the base in case they needed a donor. But when they did a genetic check to see if they were compatible, the Utroms discovered they weren't even sisters. They took samples from April's parents' graves and discovered that April was not related to them. And that wasn't even counting for some peculiar genetic marker anomalies in April's DNA. In Northampton, Shadow's boyfriend Jay started spying on her house, intrigued by the way she kept avoiding bringing him home to meet her family. Then he found out about Splinter, and right after that, he got caught by Metalhead. The kid was taken into the house by Stainless Steel Steve, who later called Louis Bronze, a character you may remember from Volume 2. Bronze was able to corroborate with his mental powers that Jay was being honest, but he proceeded to erase his memories anyway, just to be sure. Back at the base after a heated confrontation between Leonardo and Chaocho, one-foot ninja with bad history with Leo, Karai interceded. Since the events of Volume 2, the Turtles and Karai have been enemies occasionally. But at this moment in particular, they were allies. Karai did seem particularly interested in Casey's drama with April, who was now being eaten alive by the nanobots. As I explained in the Baxter video, Donatello left the base and returned to the city to visit Baxter at his secret lab, right after checking out the latest iMac. Baxter mentioned having figured out a way to create a time machine, but Donnie quickly tried to make him help them fix April. Baxter refused many times, proving to Donnie that he was irredeemable, so he put him out of his misery and returned to the base. There were 700,000 nanobots inside of April, and since they couldn't kill them without killing April, Laird came up with the idea of fighting them with nano-turtle bots. The turtles were connected to them at the base, and they would give instructions to the nano-turtle bots in April's body at Kurtzberg Memorial through the internet. This worked well, and the nano-turtle bots started killing the nanobots ninja style. But at the same time, at the offices of the New York Journal, someone received an envelope from an organization named Jihad, with an X, containing a CD. The man inserted the CD into his iBook and played it with QuickTime. Now, you normally wouldn't do such a thing, but this was a Mac, and as you know, Macs were less vulnerable to vandalware than PCs. And by the way, Peter Laird was simply a complete Apple fanatic. None of these were product placements. As you should have expected, the CD contained a xenophobic video about God making Earth for humans, not xenoforms. And the person in the video announced that a week from then, they would strike the first blow in their holy war to liberate the Earth. The editor stopped the video, ready to throw it away, but then he heard an explosion. The message was a week old. That explosion happened at a place where some aliens were at work, and unfortunately it damaged the Internet C cables that went to Kurtzberg Memorial. This affected the data stream between the turtles at the base, and without the turtles' input, the nano-turtlebots defaulted to rest mode. While all this was happening, Splinter peacefully died of natural causes at home. And if you're wondering why the Rat King was there, you can check out this other video. Back at the hospital and without any hope to re-establish the connection in time to save April, Laird let the surgeon know that he had enough data from the stream to feed the nano-turtlebots with the skills they had used before. This proved effective, even more so than the turtles themselves. Sadly, Stockman prepared a Mega Nanobot, a weapon of mass micro-destruction that was lying inert and undetectable until it sensed the destruction of all the other nanos. And to make things more critical, it was going directly to destroy April's brain. Seeing this, Laird sent all the remaining nano-turtlebots to fight the Mega Nanobot and finally destroy it. Only 4 nano-turtlebots survived. After retrieving them, Laird preserved them for further study. Who knows? Maybe they'd come in handy some other day. April was finally stable, and everyone was happy, until Steve called the hospital asking for Leo and told him that Splinter was dead. The Turtles returned to Northampton to give their final goodbyes to their father figure. But while they were preparing for the funeral, Donatello took a DNA sample of Splinter without his brothers knowing. Many guests from stories told and untold appeared for the event, with Radical and Renette making very special entrances. Renette's presence sparked some curiosity from April, something that I'll follow up on later in this video. The Turtles burned Splinter's body, and all the guests slowly left, except for Leo, who was the last to leave. After this, Casey Jones, Donnie, and Raph had a couple of adventures testing Glurren's machine. They ended up discovering other universes, and they met the cowboys of Mumesa, Cuddly, and even found out the existence of the Turtleverse in a story against the Utrom Preserva. I covered these in this other video. With Splinter gone and the Turtles being free to explore the world, Peter Laird separated them into their own storylines. Leonardo's call to action came from a specific corner of this universe after the Foot Clan found itself being chased and exterminated by some weird-looking Aztec warriors. Karai contacted Leonardo to ask for his help with the case, after one of these warriors killed 23 Foot Ninja. The whole thing was a setup to kill and study one of these beings, who have been after them for 8 months since they appeared in Japan. They've been so effective at hunting down the Foot Clan that they've already killed every active Foot Clan member worldwide, including most of the United States branches. The New York branch was the last one standing. After the autopsy, they determined these warriors had no gender, and instead had large brains and incredible physicality. Every time they killed a ninja, they left a triangular tile as part of some sort of ritual. They also used a very special kind of sword that looked like a maquahuitl, a Mesoamerican kind of weapon, but these ones were made of a carbon fiber composite. The warrior was also wearing some sort of lucky charm on their neck, a coin, a United States coin to be exact, with the head of President Al Gore. This implied that perhaps these warriors came from a different universe or timeline. Leonardo quickly noticed that the warriors seemed attracted to certain Foot Clan warehouses storing copies of a book. Karai was aware of this but refused to give much information. By the time Leonardo had a chance to fight one of these warriors, they were under the impression that he was a demon conjured by the Foot Mystics to protect their work. Leo was almost killed, had it not been for his shell. The rest of the Foot Clan interceded and took down the warrior without killing them. The clan fixed Leo's shell with a special bio-epoxy explicitly made for the turtles, based on several samples they got from them over the years. During the interrogation, the warrior called Karai the Daughter of Evil, and they identified themselves as Three Moon Jaguar. They said it was their holy duty to prevent the sowing of the Five Dooms. This confirmed Leonardo's suspicions that they were going after the clan because of something mystics did. The warrior said the Foot Clan was toying with the powers of an evil book, then proceeded to inflict a coronary infraction upon themselves and die. Suspecting Karai was covering something, Leo went to another Foot warehouse and checked out the nature of the books they were publishing. It was a book with a big N on its cover. Inside it were all spells, incantations, and mystic potions written in an ancient language that Leonardo recognized. After confronting her, Karai kept making excuses about the book being unimportant, but Leo knew better. He studied with his master Splinter about these things, and he came to think this book was one of the 9, some legendary books. Karai's insistence that these books were nothing to worry about were making him think she was being controlled by something supernatural. He went back to the Laird to study Splinter's old scrolls and books to hopefully shed some light on the situation. Things had changed while he was away. Raphael was now a monster, and Michelangelo was missing without a trace. But I'll go over those stories later. While studying the scrolls, he discovered a loose back panel hiding a secret compartment with papers. By reading these strange papers, he discovered the Battle Nexus's existence, and mixed with these papers, he found a drawing of the Makwa Weedle from those warriors. Leonardo then realized these were drawn by Splinter himself. It took him a few days to decode the papers, but Leonardo figured out the ritual to open a portal to the Battle Nexus, which according to the papers was where the warriors came from. He opened a portal with water and crossed it. On the other side, he found strange flora and fauna, even remains of an ancient civilization. Thanks to the sting of a Bompanagu, he was able to understand any language spoken to him. This was when he was greeted by a being named Jorit, a greeter of the Battle Nexus. After talking a little bit, Jorit mentioned seeing Hamato Splinter fighting a couple of times, but then they got ambushed by a group of warriors searching for some informal competition. Leonardo was alone in this, as Jorit was merely a greeter, but the fight got interrupted by a Magrathene, a deer that got transformed into a monster after drinking the water Leonardo used to access the Battle Nexus. It wasn't verified, but these monsters usually went after the ones responsible for their transformation. During the fight, Leonardo received a surprising assist from someone who looked a lot like the Shredder. After slaying the creature, Leonardo and the mysterious man introduced themselves. He was one of the finest warriors in the Battle Nexus, Oroku Yoshi, sometimes known as the Shredder. This was when Jord explained to Leonardo that the Battle Nexus was an intersection point for many realities and a good number of similar parallel realities, but with key differences. The Aztec-looking warrior showed up intending to fight Yoshi, but Gyoji, an arbiter of the Battle Nexus, appeared in front of them and repeated the rules. They could only fight within the rules of the formal contest, and this ambush was a dishonorable assault. This dissuaded the warriors. After seeing Leonardo, Gyoji went to the daimyo of the Battle Nexus and told him about his presence, referring to him as the right Leonardo. The daimyo then realized that if Leonardo was there, then what he had feared had finally come to pass. He also imagined Leonardo had many questions and they should have a talk. This is when we found out the daimyo was Splinter, probably a younger Splinter. So what happened here? I'll explore this plot again later with the Raphael storyline, but I'm under the impression that, at least at this point, the Splinter that died was an old version of himself. But something would happen to Splinter at some point that would make them different enough. More on that later. Yoshi said these weird warriors were called the Warriors of Perfect Virtue. The virtuous used to have a gender, but over millennia they evolved into a philosophy that regarded sexuality as an offense to the spirit. So they began reproducing in asexual ways. Still, whenever someone was born with reproductive organs, they killed them and displayed their bodies as reminders of the sins of gender. And as this was their strong belief, they didn't keep it to themselves. And they recently have been trying to teach their ways beyond their home system, destroying other civilizations. They even went to the extent of creating armies to convert many of these worlds to their way of life. They also went against those who dealt with sorcery or magic, which they considered antithetical to sacred law. Yoshi saved someone from them several years ago, which was why they wanted him dead. When they were ready to call it a day, Yoshi received a message to take Leonardo to see the daimyo the following day. And that was all that was ever published about this plot. I'm not exactly sure what the Virtuous were an allegory for. If the story came out today, it would have been misinterpreted, with some of the most polarizing debates happening on the internet. But it is crucial to make a distinction that the Virtuous were against sexuality, not gender. Reading the story in the context of when it came out, it seems to offer a look at the effect of personal beliefs on world politics, especially with countries that didn't have a separation of church and state and felt that other countries' freedoms were an offense to their way of life. And certain religions still do genital mutilation as standard practice, so it was probably inspired by that. Let's move on to Donatello's storyline, or at least his first storyline, as his arc will continue into Raphael's plot. It all started in Venezuela, as a group of Utroms arrived to investigate the remains of an old crash site that took place during their previous stay on the planet. They needed to retrieve any pollutants left there before humans found them and accused them of ruining their planet. But once there, they were attacked by some talking dinosaurs that ate almost all of them. The last survivor was able to send a message to the base before being eaten off camera. The Utroms contacted Donatello to help them solve the mystery of what happened there. Donnie accepted, as this was just after the death of Master Splinter, and the layer reminded him too much of him. They explained to Donnie that the development of the transmat device generated a lot of waste substances that needed to be disposed of. We know these substances because they caused the turtles' mutations in this other video. So at the time, since they were in hiding, they picked a Tepui as it was a remote and inaccessible location that would allow them to dispose of them temporarily. But on their way to the Tepui, the vessel crashed, and they never heard from that crew of 7, who were then assumed to have perished. After seeing the footage of those raptors talking, they suspected they were mutants from those wastes. The whole thing needed to remain secret to avoid the embarrassment of the Utroms contaminating the planet they came to help heal. By the time they arrived at the location, they noticed the previous tug was completely salvaged, and before even landing, they got shocked by some creature on land. Donatello fired back, blowing up the creature's arm. After investigating the arm, Donnie found it looked like Utrom flesh. The talking raptors quickly attacked them, but they came prepared for them. But then they were surprised by 2 wooden creatures that shot at them with a strange device. Donnie woke up to find himself with that human expedition group I explored earlier in this video, who's been captive there for the past 7 months. He then realized that they were inside of some kind of structure, and that they've been miniaturized. After meeting their captors, they realized they were speaking in Utrom dialect known as High Utrom. One of these wooden creatures finally made contact with them and confirmed they were the Utroms from that original trip. Since they couldn't send a signal without it being picked up by the humans, they did their best to survive. Over time, they noticed that some of the mutagen leaked, causing mutations in the flora and fauna, including the wooden creatures and the big reptiles. They took advantage of the reptiles and used them for transportation and defense. But once the reptiles started showing signs of intelligence and speech, they started losing their grip on them. The raptors thought they were being enslaved by the Utroms and became mortal enemies. The Utroms also created their new organic exoskeletons that had a longer time span than their mechanic ones. After a few years, they made a discovery. They created the quantum inversion redimensioning, which allowed them to shrink objects and beings to many times smaller than their original sizes. This allowed them to run behavioral experiments in the test environment where they kept them, the Habitrail. Donnie went with Gliminal outside of the Habitrail and discovered the whole thing was inside a peach pit, undetectable to the reptiles who were always searching for them. With the mystery solved, the Utroms decided to miniaturize the reptiles and keep them in the Habitrail for studying. They resized everyone to their original size, or close enough, but they found out that Donnie couldn't be returned to his original size because of his unique biochemistry. After this, Donnie's plot joined Raph's. But in the overall story of Volume 4, I can't help but see that the Utroms are not necessarily good people. They pollute, kidnap those that go against their cause, and tend to play a chess game with the universe. The whole behavioral experiment thing makes me think that, left to their own devices, the Utrom were actually pretty cruel beings. I'll continue to explore the Utroms later. Now let's move on to Raphael's storyline. On the day of Splinter's funeral, a group of human vampires attacked a couple of girls in Central Park. Days after that, Raphael left a bar very drunk and was attacked by this pack of vampires who were looking to drink some alien blood. He was later found by Glurin and the Fugitoid, who took him to Kurtzberg Memorial to check on his health. But once there, he had to be contained, as he started exhibiting a very aggressive mutation. Apparently, the vampires passed some kind of virus into his bloodstream, which seemed to have awakened the mutagen, restarting his cycle of mutation. The doctor suspected the virus was one of supernatural or artificial nature, and perhaps related to the Jihad organization. But Raph couldn't be contained, and after almost destroying the Fugitoid, he escaped from the building, where not even Raptar could stop him. He got into a meat delivery truck to feed, and then he went to the sewers to hide. There he crossed paths with Leatherhead, and the two fought over food. Raph, or Gamma Raph as he was unofficially called, scared Leatherhead away. Raph returned to the lair, and there he started remembering the teachings from his master Splinter, finally calming down and regaining control of himself. After he was repaired, the Fugitoid went to see if Raphael was at the lair, but when he found him, he was calm again. Still a monstrosity, but relaxed. Having grown too much, his size looked a little silly, so Leonardo supersized them for him. The Fugitoid analyzed Raphael's blood and found out that, with the toxins out of his system, his mutation was finally stable. However, his transformation seemed unlikely to revert to his previous stage. Around this time, Donatello returned from Venezuela in action figure size. He started working on a SAL 4000 android they bought from planet Duhunib in a past adventure. Donnie adapted the robot into a turtle form and started living inside it. Casey Jones, Raph, and Donatello faced the vampire gang and captured them for further investigation. And thanks to new laws regarding assault with alien infectious agents, they were able to get a blood sample from one of them without their consent. One day, Raph was at the lair but couldn't find Donnie, so he followed his new acute sense of smell and found the secret lab, where he found his brother next to a mindless clone of Splinter's body. This infuriated Raphael, who got very angry and started fighting Donnie. During this rage, he reverted back to his usual self and fainted. Donnie tied him up to make sure he'd listen to him. Donnie theorized that Raphael's anger released a flood of adrenaline into his bloodstream, which in turn counteracted whatever infection he got from those vampires, burning those elements out of his system. I don't buy this theory, but whatever. Donnie created a mindless clone of Master Splinter's body by using some Utrom rapid growth tech he had adapted for this purpose from a sample he took on the day of Splinter's funeral. He was doing this to check for toxins and poisons, just to be sure that Splinter died of natural causes and was not murdered by one of their enemies. But this also served as a second experiment. As Donnie was struggling to figure out why Raphael changed so radically, and to try to find a way to reverse it, he needed a good source of mutagen-transformed biomatter with which to experiment on. A clone of Splinter's body would work, but while doing so, he made an unexpected finding. He ran the test comparing the genetic makeup of this clone body with tissue samples he took of all of them a few years ago, during an untold tale against some doppelgangers. He found significant mismatches in the genetic structure of the samples, leading to the conclusion that the Splinter they mourned was not the same Splinter that raised them. Look, this latest discovery is a bit of a mess, and there's no follow-up issue at the moment. Given all the information we have, there are at least two theories. One, that this was an alternate Splinter from another dimension, or two, that this was an older version of the Splinter at the Battle Nexus, and that at some point, something happened to him that changed his genetic makeup. Perhaps something that took place in the Battle Nexus itself. Whatever it was, it's still a mystery, and only Peter Laird knows the right answer. As for Donatello being an action figure size, Peter Laird confirmed he wouldn't stay like that forever, so he would have eventually returned to his regular size. As for allegories, the police being able to take a blood sample without someone's consent was a clear nod to the legislative changes introduced by the Patriot Act to combat terrorism in the United States. Something that, oddly enough, worked in favor of the Utroms and Raphael in this story. But as weird as Donnie and Raph's storylines were, I found Leonardo and Michelangelo to have the more substantial plots. Let's explore what happened to Michelangelo. After the death of Splinter, Mikey found a job at Utrom Island as a translocation reorientation facilitator, some sort of tourist guide for aliens who arrived on Earth for the first time, and helped them get adjusted to their new surroundings. Fortunately or unfortunately, his first visitor was the Regenta Auriculus of Enud Minor. She was a proto-Ceraton female, perhaps some sort of governor acting on behalf of some incapacitated monarch. But she came to Earth with 2 Starachodon guards. Her first desire was to visit the Museum of Natural History. But after some suggestions from the Regenta, they ditched her bodyguards, and Mikey took her to New Hampshire to eat lobster. They went to Maine later, where they went for a swim. The two clearly started to know each other better, and Mikey couldn't help but fall in love with her. This made him nervous and insecure about himself, perhaps for the first time in his life. But after she tried to take a lobster out of a trap, Mikey had to stop her from breaking the law. This made her angry at him, and she continued swimming angrily away from him. Unfortunately, she got trapped in a fishing net and would have drowned had it not been for Michelangelo's swift actions. But rescuing wasn't enough. He had to give her mouth-to-mouth to save her life. After waking up, Sari was shocked to learn that they had shared breaths, a very intimate act for her race. However, she wasn't outraged. She was relieved and pleased. She then went to the water with Mikey and they mated. Mikey was in heaven after this, but things started moving faster when he discovered that Sari had already laid some eggs, which she'd covered with sand. She sent Mikey to find a padded container to transport the eggs. Mikey was now in the clouds, thinking about starting a family with an alien princess. But by the time a very happy Michelangelo returned to the beach, he found the bodyguards collecting the eggs and taking the Regenta back with them, under orders of someone higher in the chain of command. Mikey tried to recover the Regenta and the eggs, but in the fight he lost a tooth and his consciousness. They left the planet with Mikey inside a biostasis crate, hidden under some seafood. By the time he woke up, he was in a shared cell with other aliens, most of them Triceratons, and one of them, named Azok, was blind and had been there for the past 32 years. It's important to note that the Regenta was against the Starachodons attacking Michelangelo, but these dialogues were only clear to the readers, not Mikey. One day during a yard break, Mikey saw someone who looked like the Regenta and tried to reach her, hoping that after knowing he was being held there she would free him. But he was violently returned to the yard, and apparently that wasn't the Regenta. It was someone that looked like her. We intentionally didn't get to see who this woman was. All hope was lost until Azok realized the prisoner beside him had a very corrosive type of blood. He took a bite at him to free himself from his chains, and then instructed Michelangelo to use the blood to free himself, but warning him not to make physical contact with the blood. The exposure to the blood was enough to kill Azok very slowly, similar to the effects of radiation, but he used his last moments of life to help Mikey escape from the prison. Hungry and searching for food on this strange planet, Mikey ran into some Triceraton spies. They captured and operated on him, implanting an artifact allowing him to breathe in their atmosphere. Mikey told them about Azok dying, and after hearing this, Commander Tzurk declared the mission was over. On their way to the Triceraton homeworlds, they repaired his lost tooth and told him he had an appointment with the High Council and the Prime Leader. They explained that Zanramon had survived their escape, but was later deposed because of the events of the day. He lost a lot of political capital when he let Professor Honeycutt escape with the idea of a transmat device. After all this time, Mikey was surprised. The Triceratons seemed technologically advanced enough to develop a transmat device of their own. Tzurk explained that whenever they were close to it, the Utroms made sure they never achieved it, blowing up labs or assassinating researchers with records destroyed or corrupted. These actions were attributed to the Utrom Obscura Secreti, a Black Ops organization working for the Utrom government. They even suspected the Utroms of disguising themselves as Triceratons to achieve this. In any case, the way the Turtles battled in the arena all those years ago served as an inspiration for the Triceratons, and they have, since then, been learning their fighting techniques that didn't rely on size and power like they were used to. Tzurk created a unit focused on this kind of fighting. They called this art Tejat Uhasil, which means soft kill. Tzurk also revealed he was one of the guards during the Turtles' escape, which was how he lost one eye. When Mikey appeared in front of the Triceraton High Council, he was questioned about the death of Azok. He learned he was a very respected diplomat and philosopher, lost to them just before a peace treaty between the Republic and the Styrakedon Imperium, a treaty that would have ended centuries of blood and destructive war between the two governments. They long suspected the Styrakedons of being responsible for his disappearance, and now that they had proof, they finally concluded that the Styrakedons were irredeemable and undeserving of a peace treaty. The High Council then decided to start the total eradication of the Styrakedon race. Michelangelo, who was still hurt by the apparent betrayal of the Regenta, volunteered to help the Triceratons in their revenge war. He officially joined the Republic and joined Commander Tzurk. It's worth mentioning that they often referred to the Styrakedons as Styraki, which kinda sounds a lot like Iraqi. Make a mental note of this. The Triceratons started using biological weapons against the Styraki, which Mikey found to be too cruel. But Tzurk justified this by saying it would take longer and more Triceraton lives to do it in any other way. It would have also destroyed most of the infrastructure in that world and the intelligence assets they needed to secure. After their first mission, they were assigned to return to the planet where Mikey was held prisoner before. Thinking Sari was there, Mikey hoped to get revenge on her for what she had done to him. And that was the last we knew from this storyline. The whole thing seemed to be an allegory for a young American soldier being drafted into the war in Iraq and after the terrorist attacks. The use of anti-terrorist propaganda to recruit as many soldiers as possible to take control of a country that wasn't even involved in the terrorist attack. But this story also worked as an allegory for radicalization, and the fact that it was Michelangelo, a character known for being empathetic and lighthearted, who got indoctrinated in such a bellicose way of thinking. It probably was a good reflection of the times. Times when people suddenly started identifying with xenophobic and Islamophobic points of view. And obviously times when disenfranchised civilians also found themselves indoctrinated in the most extremist organizations or groups. But most importantly, Michelangelo was just hurt and running under unproven assumptions that Sari had betrayed him, without properly knowing what happened. And as far as we can tell, he was wrong, and he simply bought into the Triceraton propaganda. After all, the Regenta wasn't even a Styrakedon. I'm sure that, had the story continued, he would have discovered the truth about the Regenta and probably met his children. In this scenario, Sari's presumed presence on the planet parallels the alleged presence of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We also don't know what the political situation was in the Styrakedon Imperium, so I could also imagine a revolution coming up there as well. Whatever the case, the whole experience would have been a very dark period in his life, but he would have returned to the principles and virtues that made him who he was. Or at least that's my take on it. But not all storylines involve the Turtles. I already covered the shocking revelation about the Fugitoid's origin in this other video. And while I already covered the other plots in this video, and this video, I'll go over them again so you can see them in context. After her traumatic experience, April and her family returned to the farmhouse in Northampton to rest. There, she started going over all the memories that survived the fire of the second time around store. In between her childhood things, April found her dad's sketches. She also found a film where her father drew her in 1962. Back then, Robin was 4 years older than her, and in that film, Robin was probably 2.5. That meant her father's sketch of April was done before she was born. Really confused about her origins, April contacted Renette with a Time Panic button she provided them for emergencies. Renette knew why she called her, and she took some years before responding. That's how troubled she was about the whole thing. They went to the past and returned, and judging by April's hair, they spent months there. April was utterly destroyed by the experience. She abandoned her car and went missing for days. April called Casey to tell him that she couldn't return home yet, and she didn't know who she was or where she belonged. This made Casey furious enough to start patrolling the streets again on the streets of Springfield, Massachusetts. However, one night he found himself competing against another crime fighter, a female version of Nobody. He chased her and discovered she was April. By the way, a bit after this story, it would be revealed that Nobody wasn't really dead. Check out this other video for the details on his return. Back to April, she finally explained to Casey what happened when she went to the past with Renette. When they arrived in the past, they assumed the life of two cockroaches to be able to spy on her father. They found out her mother was also unable to have children, but in her case it was because of something that happened during Robin's birth. Knowing that having babies wasn't an option anymore, they were in disagreements about adopting a baby. They followed her father to the basement, where he took a strangely designed box that contained some sort of artifact with an eraser on one extreme and a gem trapped in a cage on the other. Looking at this gem, April recognized it from what Donatello told her about the crystal that Kirby, one of the tenants in that building, used to give life to the creatures he drew. Did her father know what this gem did? He clearly bought this artifact from an estate sale of unknown origins. But remember, they were in the shape of cockroaches and had to take some time off to eat and mate with other cockroaches. Not sure why this had to be mentioned, but I'm passing the trauma to you now. You're welcome. One day, they witnessed her father drawing an apple when he discovered his eraser was completely worn out. He then attached the artifact that had an eraser to the end of the pencil he was using. After penciling the apple, a second one appeared next to it. It didn't take long for him to realize the pencil was now creating the things he was drawing. These things, alive or not, would disappear after a while. After telling his wife, he drew a puppy for Robin. The dog existed for 2 weeks before disappearing, breaking Robin's heart. The fact that it lasted so long made her father figure out that the longevity of these beings correlated with how much emotional energy he invested in them while he was drawing them. This was when he started to engineer a baby. This one lasted a week, and its disappearance traumatized April's mother. Thinking that they weren't emotionally invested enough, they tried again. And this time, the baby was named April and lasted 42 days. April's mother was devastated, but April couldn't help but wonder about the final fate of those babies. Kirby's creatures ended up in another world. Could her baby sisters be alive somewhere else? Could they have survived? The next time her father tried to create a baby, he attached the artifact to a brush and drew the baby directly in ink. The baby materialized, and after a few months, she stayed. Unsure of the final fate of these creatures, April and Renette removed the gem from the artifact. In their dying moments as cockroaches, they threw it down the vent, where Kirby would later find it in a story that I'll cover some other day. After finishing her story with Casey, she told him she felt like she was nobody. She came back home briefly to then take a soul-searching trip. During this trip, April rented a cabin on the western shore of Alaska. There she met a Tlingit of the Raven clan named Oneida. After the woman saved her life from being spotted by a bear, April told her that she was a drawing come to life that only lasted because her father believed in his drawing. But her father was now dead, so why was she still alive? The woman said that April believed in herself, which is probably why she was alive. However, she came here to die. April admitted that she did indeed go there to die. One day while hiking, she crossed paths with a bear and its cub. It didn't take her long to realize it was an entire family of bears. They forced her into a cliff where she almost fell. While she was hanging from a root, she thought she saw the spirit of Splinter. Seeing the spirit of someone recently deceased, April realized this could be the moment of her death. But she also realized that she didn't want to die. But then Oneida appeared atop the cliff and asked her if she wanted to live. April said yes, and the woman helped her climb up. April left the island, and that was when we discovered Oneida was the spirit of a wild mare from the 40s left behind by her family. It makes sense when you read the full story, trust me. Back to Shadow, she discovered her boyfriend Jay had joined Jihad. And while she was spying on one of their camps, she was surprised by an alien smuggler. She managed to run away and called for help. This resulted in Metalhead rescuing her from the lethal toy robot known as Garda-Friend. In action figure size, Donnie helped investigate the place and found many Garda-Friends in their original packaging. Raph came in to help him and the alien smuggler tried to escape, finally getting caught by a Raptor. The Garda-Friends that were being smuggled were also about to come out to the market, but this plot remained unfinished. One night, Casey, Fugitoid, Glurin, and Gliminal were having some drinks when they were attacked by a Jihan bomber who wanted to read a manifesto. Casey tried to incapacitate him but was too drunk to properly do anything. The bomber activated his bomb, so Gliminal miniaturized him. Fugitoid in his giant form made sure to contain the explosion. Karai, who was at the bar, helped Casey recover from the fall and offered her doctors to check on him as partial repayment of an old debt. Casey woke up the next day at Karai's place, not knowing if something had happened between them. Something Karai wouldn't deny nor confirm. She gave Casey a ride to his apartment and asked him to use his facilities. Around the same time, April was on her way back, and the three would have probably found each other at the apartment. There's another story involving the Turtle allies that's probably not canon. In this story, Robin was taken to Kurtzberg Memorial after contracting a contagious cancer of alien origin. The virus made it to Earth despite the bioscanners in the transmat. Because this cancer was so contagious and fast, there was no treatment for it. The Utroms were working on a cure, but Robin didn't have that much time. April called the Turtles and they decided to use the Nano Turtlebots, now more than simply 4. The Nano Turtlebots weren't effective, so Glurin decided to miniaturize the Turtles, and they went inside Robin to stop the cancer cells from growing out of control. During this experiment, the Utroms found a cure and saved Robin. Glurin brought the Turtles back to standard size, implying that perhaps this happened at some point in the future, after Volume 4, or it didn't happen at all. There was one plot that I couldn't associate with any storyline. In issue 28 in the town of Swellfields, the whole population disappeared and then reappeared face up on the streets, alive and confused. It's unclear what this was about, as it was never followed up. Recently, Jim Lawson was commissioned to draw some speculative covers for Volume 4. He created one where he theorized the whole population of Swellfields was under mind control to fight the Turtles in the city. Just for fun, he also drew this one about the Battle Nexus plot, this one about the Garda-Friends, this one with Mikey finally confronting the Triceratons, this one with Michelangelo returning home with Sari and the kids, and this one of Raphael on a unicorn surrounded by terror bears. Maybe. And if you want to take a better look at the kids, here's another speculative drawing Jim did of the whole family. I complemented my retelling of Volume 4 with some stories from Tales of the TMNT that took place simultaneously, at least the ones that were related to the stories there. However, there was a serialized backup story about an Utrom known as Professor Obligado. While the stories didn't have common ground with the other plots, some of the events there added important information about the true nature of the Utroms. Professor Obligado went to the planet Magonia, a planet long suspected of being the crib of the Utrom race. There he found a sentient being and fed him. This being could have been an ancestor of the Utroms. But while there, he also was wondering why this planet was hidden from history. The planet was cloaked and masked by deep black budget technology. He soon discovered it was the doing of the Utromi Obscurus Secreti, who were now trying to silence Professor Obligado. They were carrying the Utrom government Black Ops. He stole their ship and data mined it for information related to Magonia. He would need the information to bring a legal case before the Universal Court of Supreme Justice. But after passing through a mythological wormhole, he found archaeological carvings and then saw his own ship, and then trapped himself in a jar. I don't know either. Over time, Professor Obligado became addicted to the Menta Wave. While escaping from the police on Earth, he fell onto the streets and died. The Utrom Preserva, an organization dedicated to preserving Utrom memories of importance, recovered his body and kept him alive for a while to gather his memories. but Obligado's spirit eventually left his body. There are two more stories to discuss that take place after Volume 4. The first one is Dark Shadows, which I already discussed in this other video. It's an alternate future story starring Shadow. Several years after the Utrom arrived on Earth, they discovered that climate change was bad. But in this case, it seemed to be worsening because of a shift in the axis of Earth's rotation, paired with some tectonic fluctuations. The Utroms decided that the only solution was mass evacuation. It seemed that the Utroms didn't come to save Earth, they came to preserve its dominant species. But not all humans left with the Utroms. Some heroes stayed behind, like Casey, Shadow, and at least 3 of the Turtles, along with the remains of the Foot Clan. The whole thing was a possible future shown by Renette to Raphael upon asking her if he should train her. They discovered that this was the most likely scenario if he did train her. Otherwise, she was very likely to die in an attack by a Foot Mystic at the early age of 23. You can check out the whole alternate future timeline in this other video. In 2014, for the 30th anniversary of the Turtles, Jim Lawson did a short story in this universe, in which the Turtles and Shadow reunited again after her time in college. This story's place in continuity may be debatable, but at least in this one, Shadow seemed to have survived the Foot Mystic attack. You may wonder what happened if you made it this far and didn't live through it. According to Peter Laird, very early during this run, Volume 4 was never going to be like Volume 1 without Kevin Eastman's input. It was simply something he wasn't interested in trying to replicate. He wanted to achieve a more natural life pace and rhythm, where things didn't usually have nice clean beginnings and endings, and events overlapped. As frustrating as this would be for some, he promised it would all have paid off. But by issue 9, Peter Laird started getting plenty of criticism for his stories, both in letters and online. Most complaints were about the lack of action and the decompressed storytelling. Another very common criticism was of Jim Lawson's art. Jim, at some point, tried to correct his style following some of the complaints he received, but it just didn't feel right for him. Around the time Peter Laird fell in love with Segways, the second volume of Tales of the TMNT was already in production to fill in the gaps left by the inconsistent timeline of Volumes 1, 2, and 4. Tales started in January 2004, monthly, first edited by Steve Murphy and later by Dan Berger. Peter Laird was involved in approving and providing feedback on the early stories, but as the workload increased with the TV show and the movie, his attention to the title varied. This resulted in some of those stories having an unlikely place in continuity. Having said that, Tales of the TMNT was the perfect counter-programming to Volume 4. Whereas the main title was very niche in storytelling and art, the companion book was mainly composed of done-in-one stories with many different art teams that had a broader appeal to fans of the Turtles. Unfortunately, the letter pages became a war zone for both titles. With Steve Murphy and Peter Laird having very strong opinions about the Bush administration, the letter pages became more of an opinion column, with many fans simply responding to disagree with them. Some things were said from both sides that were not very civilized. Fans in general were against political opinions in their comic books, which may have contributed to a decline in sales for a book that was already not selling well. To be fair, political opinions stayed on the letter pages. While the stories could be understood as allegories of the political situation in the world at the time, they could also be read and understood without knowing the real-life context. But again, remember that this was happening during the war in Iraq, when the American media was starting to come out of their self-imposed patriotic phase that began in 2001. But no matter if you read the letter pages or not, Volume 4 became impenetrable after a year or two with its decompressed, never-ending nature, and the lack of collected editions didn't help. Still, the decompressed storytelling got the most of some very rude fans, who couldn't help but write to Peter Laird to tell him he had no idea how to write the Turtles. In retrospect, there were probably more positive letters than negative ones. Still, Peter clearly felt like he needed to defend himself from these crazy accusations all the time. By 2005, work on the CGI movie started, and Peter Laird worked very closely with Kevin Monroe on the story and the visual look. This probably took a lot of Peter's time from the books. It was around issue 23 that Peter revealed that the book never made a profit, apart from the first issue. Print run numbers fell into the 4,000 copies per issue, and the cost of producing the book was higher than what they made from them. But since this was Peter's passion project, he kept the book going. It was around issue 24 that he hinted at the possibility of taking breaks and maybe moving to an annual schedule. And given the situation of a book that barely sold copies, to people writing to tell him how displeased they were with the book, it's not hard to imagine why he also saw the possibility of the story never getting a proper conclusion. Around issue 26 in 2006, he admitted to being overwhelmed with everything he was involved with, which sometimes led to some dry periods where he couldn't sit down and write. Peter, once again, was feeling burnout. This burnout led to a considerable publication gap of over a year between issues 28 and 29. The issue came out first in digital for free, and then in a very pricey limited run of 1,000 copies. By then, the movie already came out, also polarizing fans. You can check out this other video about the behind-the-scenes and critical reception of that movie. The change in the price and number of copies had to do a lot with the frustrations Peter had to go through. The main one was meeting the needs of Diamond, the monopolistic comic book distributor. He had to prepare solicitations 4 months in advance with ads. This was achievable for other publishers, but it was hard for a bi-monthly book like this one. It would take the book an entire month from the moment it went to the prints to the moment it reached the reader's hands, which for him was really frustrating. With these things in mind, each issue was released first online as soon as it was completed. First through wowio.com, as a downloadable and printable PDF, and in lower resolution at ninjaturtles.com. All the digital versions were available for free. There would be limited prints of 1,000 copies for physical editions, available via mail order from Mirage at $10 plus shipping, with the first 100 copies including a black and white sketch on the inside front or back cover. With these changes, Peter expected Volume 4 to continue being fun to do for him. But readers were still upset and buying the book. On issue 29, someone asked Peter to discontinue Volume 4 as nobody he knew liked it. Readers and forum commentators were having a blast hating Peter Laird then. One reason for controversy was his desire to update the first few issues of Volume 1 by digitally redoing the lettering and duotones. The main reason was that the duotone they applied in those early issues made the inking lines a bit muddy. Hopefully the digital toning would enhance those inking lines. He would also do some text corrections like correcting Michelangelo's name and tweaking some narrations. Angry fans saw this as an attempt from Peter to erase Kevin Eastman's work from those issues, which was kind of a stupid theory. It was impossible to remove the work of one without removing both, as they completed each other's work. To make it even more ridiculous, all the original issues were available for free at ninjaturtles.com without any modifications. Issue 30 came out 1 year later, and in there Peter estimated he could wrap up everything in about more or less 6 issues. By 2009, during the 25th anniversary, Mirage announced a live-action film for 2011, focused on the origins of the Ninja Turtles. It was going to be produced by Scott Mednick from 300 and Superman Returns, and Galen Walker from the TMNT movie of 2007. The movie was going to adapt the first 11 issues of the comic book. Then things went crazy. In an event that I'll leave for another video, Peter Laird, burned out, unmotivated, and feeling like he was not enjoying life or spending any time with his family, decided to sell the franchise to Viacom. But he kept the right to self-publish 18 issues a year if he wanted to. Issue 31 came out digitally in Peter Laird's blog in 2010. The book remained only in digital form for a very long time until it was eventually printed. By June 2010, issue 32 was already penciled but not printed, and Peter was considering finding the plots of the remaining issues and posting them online. But when he checked them out, he realized they weren't very complete, so he promised to perhaps beef them up a bit. This never came to pass. Issue 32 came out almost 5 years later, during the 30th anniversary of the Turtles. While the book was nearly finished 3 years before, inking was done initially by Eric Talbot and then completed by Steve Levine. Still, what seemed to have taken a lot of time was the lettering. as so much time passed that Peter forgot some of the shortcuts. Volume 4 remains uncollected, at least officially. There's some Russian collected editions with new covers by Jim Lawson, but that's it. And since the NinjaTurtles.com site was taken over by Nickelodeon, the comic stopped being available online. Well, at least legally. A lot of time has passed, and Peter's still considering the door to finish Volume 4 to be open. If Peter Laird were to open some unsolicited advice, I'd recommend he finish Volume 4, collaborating with his friends. Share the responsibilities, have some fun with the Turtles again, and maybe do a Kickstarter to fund and publish it. Although I can imagine IDW being interested in the story being finished and ready to be reprinted for the first time, just like they did with Volume 3. That would be one less headache to deal with. So letting IDW deal with all the publishing responsibilities should make the whole process fun again for Peter and company. And speaking of Kickstarter, I'll cover TMNT Odyssey and the end of Mirage Studios in a future video. If at some point this story finds a conclusion, I'll make a video and link it here. In the meantime, check out this other video. Thanks for watching.